Gregory was born into a large devout family in Cappadocia, modern-day Turkey, around the year 335. Some of his brothers and sisters were named saints as well, including Saint Basil the Great and Saint Macrina. A learned man and a scholar, Gregory was often the center of contention. Gregory was named Bishop of Nyssa in circa 371. Gregory was one of the leaders against the Arian heresy and defended the divinity of Christ, and was well known for his writing on the Holy Trinity. It is thought that Gregory died around 394.
The same power of the Word makes the priest also sublime and venerable, marked off from the crowd by the rarity of consecration. Yesterday and the day before yesterday he was one of many, one of the crowd. All at once he becomes a leader, an overseer, a teacher of piety, a perfecter of concealed mysteries. And this without changing body and form. As to the outside, he remains the same as he was, but by an invisible power and grace, his invisible soul has been changed for the better. Writings of Saint Gregory of Nyssa. Believing and confessing, as we do, that in every deed and thought, whether in this world or beyond this world, whether in time or in eternity, the Holy Spirit is to be understood as joined to the Father and the Son, and is wanting in no wish or energy, or anything else that is implied in a devout conception of supreme goodness, and, therefore, that except for the distinction of order and person, no variation in any point is to be understood. But we assert that while his place is counted third in mere sequence after the Father and the Son, third in the order of the transmission, in all other respects we acknowledge his inseparable union with them, both in nature, in honor, in Godhead, and glory, and majesty, and almighty power, and in all devout belief. On the Holy Spirit. Since the God-containing flesh partook for its substance and support of this particular nourishment also, and since the God who was manifested infused himself into perishable humanity for this purpose, therefore by this communion with deity mankind might at the same time be deified. For this end it is by dispensation of his grace that he disseminates himself in every believer through that flesh whose substance comes from bread and wine, blending himself with the bodies of believers, to secure, by this union with the immortal, man too may be a sharer in incorruption. Catechetical Oration 37. But now that God's city, the Church, is besieged, and the great wall of the faith is shaken, battered by the encircling engines of heresy, and there is no small risk of the word of the Lord being swept into captivity through their devilish onslaught. Deeming it a dreadful thing to decline taking part in the Christian conflict, I have not turned aside to repose, but have looked on the sweat of toil as more honorable than the relaxation of repose. Knowing well that just as every man, as the Apostle says, shall receive his own reward according to his own labor, so as a matter of course, he shall receive punishment for neglect of labor proportioned to his strength. The Great Catechism. They assert that God, if he had been so pleased, might have forcibly drawn those who were not inclined to yield to accept the gospel message. But where then would have been their free will? Where their virtuous merit? If the will remains without the capacity of action, virtue necessarily disappears, since it is shackled by the enforced quiescence of the will. Then, if virtue does not exist, life loses its value, reason moves in accordance with fatalism, the praise of moral guardians is gone, and sin may be indulged in without risk, and the difference between the courses of life is obliterated. The conclusion, then, is that it is not the goodness of God that is chargeable with the fact that the faith is not engendered in all men, but rather the disposition of those by whom the preaching of the word is received. The Great Catechism. After his departure out of the body, he gains knowledge of the difference between virtue and vice, and finds that he is not able to partake of divinity until he has been purged of the filthy contagion in his soul by purifying fire. Sermon on Death. This grasping after money and superiority engenders either anger with his kith and kin, or pride towards his inferiors, or envy of those above him. Then hypocrisy comes in after this envy, a soured temper after that, a misanthropical spirit after that, and behind them all, a state of condemnation, which ends in the dark fires of hell. On virginity.